Welcome to Time to Press Pause, a podcast for CEOs by CEOs. I'm your host, Ellen Williams, CEO of The Salient Strategist, and today I'm speaking with Julie Thomas. Julie is President and CEO of ValueSelling Associates, Inc., and author of Value Selling, Driving Sales Up One Conversation at a Time, and The Power of Value Selling, the gold standard to drive revenue and create customers for life. Julie began her sales career at Gartner Group, now Gartner Inc. In 1999, she became Vice President of Gartner's sales training for the Americas. Her role included successfully onboarding new sales hires and driving adoption of the value selling framework. In 2003, Julie joined ValueSelling Associates as President and CEO. She led the company to become an industry leader in competency and process-based training for escalating sales performance in business-to-business sales organizations worldwide. Hello, Julie, and welcome to Time to Press Pause.
Good morning or good afternoon. It's great to be here. Thank you for inviting me into this conversation.
Well, thank you for being here. And we've had the opportunity to message a bit on LinkedIn, which is where I originally met you. And I'm so very interested to hear your Press Pause story.
Well, awesome. It goes back a little ways, but it was an interesting time in my life. So let me take you back in time a little bit. I'm working for a great IT research and advisory services company. You may have heard of them in the technology space called Gartner. And I had grown up there through sales, sales management, and ultimately was running global sales training. Had always been a top performer, had always had fabulous relationships, not only with the executives that I reported to, but with my team. And in July of 2002, there was a leadership change 2 levels above me. And as often happens with a leadership change, there's a ripple effect. So it started at the executive level, and then by October, my boss was impacted with the next ripple as the new leader brought in his team and kind of refocused the team. And by December, I got the call from my new boss, who had never really been interested in getting to know me or talk to me. It was a really kind of odd situation. Kind of felt like that deer on the Far Side cartoon that walks around with a big bullseye on his chest, and it says, bummer of a birthmark. And sure enough, the Friday before Christmas in December, I get a call from my new boss, and he shares the information that they're eliminating my position and reorganizing the group and the team. And lo and behold, my services were no longer required. And after I kind of picked myself up off the floor, because, that's a hard call to get. So I went to the mall and finished my Christmas shopping. And it was the week before Christmas. I think the next day my parents were flying in, my in-laws were flying in. It was a crazy time. So I kind of just blacked it out, but life catches up with you. And we came to right after New Year's and I had to figure it out. And I pushed pause on my career for the first time. I had 2 babies at home. I didn't know what to do. So I did nothing for 30 days except started playing tennis again and was enjoying just kind of focusing on myself. And then I went and got, as part of my release from my employer, I was given a package of like 90 days with a career coach to help me get ready. And I took advantage of that. They did the normal stuff that you would expect. Like, I'll help you rebuild your resume. I'll help you polish off your networks. Who do you know? Who you're going to call? Practice interviewing, preparing for that. It had been 16 years since I had looked for a job. But they also had a workshop on entrepreneurialism. And I dove into all of their training that they had and used my coach to help me build a business plan to recreate myself into something other than just a corporate employee. And that pause really opened my eyes to the possibilities. Sometimes we're so busy running around the track we don't see other opportunities. They're in our blind spot or they're just not on our radar. And I had worked in corporate America. I thought I would always work in corporate America. I thought I would always be climbing that elusive ladder and grabbing the next ring and the next title. And I realized, you know what? There was more to life. Like I said, I had two babies. I could certainly have made the decision to go back into a corporate America and jump back on that ladder, either at an equal rung or a lower rung, and built myself back up. But one of the things I learned in going through kind of this entrepreneurial, hey, is there another way to get fulfillment in my career and have an impact on the people that I wanted to have an impact with, and at the same time have some freedom in my lifestyle, which was becoming increasingly important to me. I didn't need freedom when I was single. But I needed a little more freedom now that I had a couple kids. I didn't want to have to get on a plane on the day before Halloween and not be home for Halloween because somebody else had decided there was a critical meeting that I needed to be across the country at. When you're on the corporate ladder, you have very little freedom or control of your schedule. And think back 20 years ago, we didn't celebrate that we needed to be respectful of people's personal lives and time kind of the way we do now, and people expect to have some flexibility. 20 years ago, every meeting I was invited to was a command performance, and it was not optional, and there was not a Zoom alternative. And so that's what we did. It's what we knew. It was the only thing we knew at the time. So that pause really allowed me to learn and explore other options. And I wouldn't be where I am today if somebody hadn't pushed me off the deck into the deep end of the pool.
All right, into the deep end of the pool. Yeah, where you really have to figure out a way to swim, or
Yep,
you sink, right? Sink or swim.
absolutely.
So tell me a little bit about your entrepreneurship experience.
So it was interesting. I was a vice president in doing corporate onboarding and sales training for this company that was growing and adding a ton of salespeople. One of our suppliers was a company that I worked with here in San Diego. I lived in San Diego. When I moved to San Diego, my husband and I did whatever anybody else would do in 1997. Remember, this no internet, no Google at the time. You called people that you knew who lived in that area and said, "Hey, we're moving there. Do you have a realtor that you can introduce me to? The supplier I knew played golf. My husband plays golf. Can you recommend areas that we should live in or golf clubs that my husband should investigate?" And those types of things. Well, through that journey and calling the supplier that I worked with, he and his wife and my husband and I became very good friends. He kind of welcomed us into our social circles. We ended up joining the same golf club that they went to. We ended up living in a very close by neighborhood. They invited us to barbecues. We met other people. It was great. So when I left Gartner, Lloyd, his name was Lloyd Zappington, said, "Julie, when you're ready, you can come work for me anytime you want." I was like, "Oh, okay, that's a great plan B. Like I know how to be a sales trainer. I know to do that. That's a great plan B." Well, 30 days into my journey, I start talking to him like, "Yeah, that might make sense." And then he called me one day and he said, "Hey, let's have lunch. I have a couple ideas I want to run by you." So off we go to lunch. At the time, he was about 65. He said, "You know what, Julie? I'm at a point in my life where I want to play golf more and travel less. What do you think about having a plan in place for you to take over, not just come in as a sales trainer, but take over the whole company?" I was like, "Wow, well, that's an interesting idea. Let me think about that." Well, that's exactly what happened. We put together a plan, and over the next 3 months, negotiated what that would look like. I acquired all of the intellectual property, all of the licenses, all of the assets of this company from Lloyd. And he did have a business partner at the time, but those two were kind of parting their ways. So this was an easy way for them to part their ways and not have conflict between them. Let's just sell it to a third party. And that's what I did. In 2003, I became the president and CEO of ValueSelling Associates. He coached and mentored me for the first few years through that transition. And that's what I've been doing now for the last 21 years of running, growing, and building this organization into the global organization it is today. I am truly, in my mind, an accidental entrepreneur. I never set out to have my own company. As a matter of fact, I used to argue with people. I'm not an entrepreneur. I'm just an executive running a smaller company. But I learned to accept the title entrepreneur as I realized how much risk I had to take in every decision that I made, even once I had the small business, control and ownership of the small business, because I didn't have the safety net of a large corporation with all of the cash flow and financial resources and the teams of people to help you get things done. It was us. And it was a very small, lean core team to get the work done. And when you're a lean, small team, every time you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else. And those are some of the lessons that I learned early on in my journey.
Yes to something and no to something else. That's a very poignant statement. And as entrepreneur and CEO, it's imperative to be able to make those choices. And one of the recurring themes I've had on the podcast is that CEOs, although everyone may think they do, they don't always have the answers.
No, we don't. Sometimes we fake it till we make it. Sometimes we make a decision and trust that we'll figure it out as we go along. So sometimes I focus on the what, not the how. Because if I wait for the how, I may miss the window of that opportunity. But so you kind of have to trust that. The mistake I made early on in this role is I started saying yes to a lot of things. And I realized what I have to do is figure out what are my core 3 or 4 goals and objectives for the year. And that has to be my North Star. Now, inside of that, I need the ability to be agile. And we all learned that lesson the hard way during COVID, right? Like we had a plan. And on February 28th, I realized our plan was not going to work. That's when California, I lived in California, was one of the first states to start issuing stay-at-home orders. We all thought, remember, it was 2 weeks at a time. Okay, so we all drove to the office, we grabbed our monitors, we brought them home to our kitchen tables or our spare bedrooms or whatever, when we realized it was, in some cases, up to 18 months. You need the ability to be agile. But if you don't have a North Star, it's easy to start taking on more than you can achieve, and then nothing gets done. And it's very easy to follow a shiny object or a custom thing that isn't going to be a leveraged product that we can bring to a broader audience, but that's going to take a significant amount of resource to build and do it and find out that there's no leverageability or long-term revenue opportunity there. When we say yes to something, we're not just adding it, we're reprioritizing everything in that context. Because if you just say yes and just keep adding on, that's where burnout happens. Because you feel like you're on the treadmill and you're not getting anywhere because there's never going to be enough time.
There's never going to be enough time. Good to press pause and
Absolutely.
think those things through.
And think it through and be strategic in that. But then not be afraid to make the decision and act. You want to think it through, and every decision that we make has unintended consequences. As hard as we try to envision what could go wrong, what could happen that I'm not anticipating, they all will have some unintended consequences. I've learned to make decisions and assume positive intent with everybody around me and work hard to make sure that we have clarity on where we're going and what we're doing. And then we're going to figure out the how we're going to get there together.
So a little bit of calculated risk, it may not be smooth sailing. You'll figure it out along the way, but you're anticipating there may be a few bumps. So we need to be able to sort of roll with that.
You have to. The pace of change in 2024 is so significantly more rapid than it was even 20 years ago. If you're not agile, if you're not continually learning, if you're not leaning into the evolving environment and making decisions in spite of there not being complete certainty, you'll get left behind. I firmly believe that.
In spite of certainty. And certainly there is a lot of uncertain. I'm certain there's uncertainty. We just never know. You do your best, you do your homework, you bring your A team together to discuss and move forward. And I think your advice is great. And I love that you were willing to say things like the mistake I made, because we all make them. And just because you have a 3-letter title doesn't make you above making mistakes.
Absolutely. No, I make them every day. Sometimes you win, sometimes you learn. Many of the mistakes that I make is where I'm spending my time. My time is my scarcest resource. Of course, I scrutinize the financial investments that I make and where we're spending our money. And I think I'm a good steward of the resources we have in this business. But my time, I can make more money. I can't make more minutes in the day to get things done. And when you're an entrepreneur or in a small business, CEO does not stand for Chief Executive Officer. It stands for Chief Everything Officer.
I totally agree. I've had my share of small businesses. I'm CEO of a small business now, and I was really happy to hear you say what's really important as far as your decisions is where you spend your time. The services that I'm offering are to alleviate some of the getting in the weeds that CEOs can sometimes do, regardless of the size of the organization. And that another phrase would be micromanaging, and enabling the CEO to remove themselves from that role and focus on the unique responsibilities of a CEO. Even though you said it's the chief everything, there are things that only you can do, of course. So
No, and when I catch myself having an opinion on what color the coffee mugs are going to be in our next client giveaway, I want to just kind of slap myself silly and say, at the end of the day, does it really matter? I've got some creative people on my team that can make that decision. It does not need to involve me. And when you empower your team, there's a difference between delegation and abdication, right? Which I'm sure you talk about with your clients. I don't have to micromanage to ensure that people are on track for the milestones and the deliverables and the goals that they're signing up for. And then let them go do their thing and know that they can trust to escalate to me when they need help or resource, or they need to communicate that something's not on track without getting their head bit off.
exactly. And that's the service I'm offering as well. I'm empowering the team. Let's look at your process. Is it the right process? And my focus typically is on digital transformation and technology. And a lot of times you have teams that don't have experience in that, and everyone sort of jumps in and gets involved. So it may not be the color of the cup, but it could be what's the field going to be called, and where is it going to be on the screen, and those kinds of day-to-day decisions of the team. The CEO needs to have trust in that team. When I do the right job, the next strategic initiative, they won't need me because the trust has been built. The CEO understands the process, the team understands the process, and communication is better than what it was before I got there.
I
So
love
let me
it.
ask you, no, thanks. So let me ask you, Julie, what advice would you have for a CEO when they should identify when it's time for them to press pause?
I think anytime any executive or anybody in their personal life, their professional work, if you don't have clarity, you need to hit pause. Because the worst thing you can do is get halfway down a path and realize it's the wrong path. Get grounded and make sure I am clear and committed to where those outcomes are going to be. Then I can plot the path. If I'm clear on the what and where I want to go, we will figure out the how. And I think most people get so focused on, well, what do I do tomorrow, or what's the next step, and then without a vision or clarity of where they're ending up, and so they end up all over the place.
I think that's really great advice. Certainly having clarity, and the only way to get clarity is to have the time to think about things and evaluate things. Thank you. I think that's great advice. And to your point, not exclusive to CEOs, but to anyone going through pretty much anything in life. If you're not really sure what direction you should be going in, then it may be time to press pause. Thank you so much for your stories. You did give me a few. I love that you truly turned lemon into lemonade with the semi-surprise of leaving Gartner. And I really appreciate your time being here with me today.
Thank you so much, Ellen. It's been a joy.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Time to Press Pause. To learn more about Julie, go to ValueSelling.com. To learn more about me, go to thesalientstrategist.com. And be sure to join us again wherever you listen to your podcasts.